welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going deep on accounts payable.
AP.
AP, you got it. And, we've gotten a ton of questions and articles and resources from you guys. So
Yeah.
you're interested in this. And one of the things that we've been looking at is this website called Found It,
Yeah, this looks familiar.
which has a lot of really good advice on AP and especially AP job interview questions.
Very timely.
Very timely. So if you're thinking about getting into this world, or maybe you're already in it and you want to, move up,
Absolutely.
this is the deep dive for you.
Definitely.
Now, one of the first things that popped up and Found It was just this basic question, and I'll admit I've gotten this wrong myself before, but the difference between payable and receivable.
Yeah.
Can you clear that up for us?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to think about this is, from whose perspective are we talking about?
Okay.
So if we're a business, right?
Mm.
And we've sold some products or services, the money that is owed to us, that's our accounts receivable. It's like sitting out there, we're waiting to receive it. But on the flip side, we also have vendors, suppliers, people we need to pay, right?
Right.
That's accounts payable. That's the money we are obligated to pay out.
So it's two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. It's just whose books are we looking at?
Yeah. Now, Found It really emphasizes that AP isn't just like paying bills on time. It's like a crucial part of a company's
Oh, absolutely.
short-term liabilities and their cash flow.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So when we think about a company, we think about how profitable are they?
Right.
How much money are they making? But it's not just about sales. It's about managing the money that's coming in, the money that's going out.
Right.
So accounts payable, how quickly you pay your vendors, what kind of terms you've negotiated, that actually can affect the bottom line, how much cash the company has on hand.
So a well-managed AP department can actually help the company be more profitable.
Absolutely. They can actually save the company money.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so now Found It also goes into a little bit about the different roles within AP, like, accounts payable processors and specialists. So what are we talking about there?
Yeah, so you can almost think about it as like a pyramid.
Okay.
At the base level, you have your accounts payable processors, and they're really doing like that day-to-day work.
Okay.
So we're talking data entry, we're talking making sure that invoices are matched up with the purchase orders, making sure the numbers all line up.
So someone who's really detail-oriented.
Absolutely. Really organized, really focused on accuracy. And then as you move up that pyramid, you get to your accounts payable specialists.
Okay.
And they might be overseeing a team of processors. They're taking on more responsibility. They might be doing things like analyzing the AP data.
Oh, interesting.
Looking for ways to improve processes, maybe even negotiating directly with vendors.
So it sounds like Found It really highlighted those problem-solving skills as being really important if you're looking to move up in AP.
It's not just about, can you crunch the numbers? It's about, can you think critically and add value beyond just processing those invoices?
Okay. So let's walk through the actual AP process. Where does this whole journey begin?
So it starts with a vendor sending an invoice.
Okay.
Right? That's the document that's saying, hey, here are the goods or services we provided, the quantities, the prices, all of that good stuff.
Okay.
And it's going to have, the payment terms on it as well.
And so this is where it gets tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because Found It really emphasized this three-way match thing.
Absolutely.
What is that all about?
So the three-way match is basically comparing that invoice we just talked about with two other key documents. The purchase order, so that's proof that we ordered these goods or services.
Right.
And then the goods receipt note. So did we actually receive them?
Okay.
And we're just making sure that everything matches up, that the invoice is accurate, and that we're not paying for something that we didn't order or that we didn't receive.
Right. So it's like a safety net to prevent errors.
Absolutely. And potentially fraud too, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's a really critical control.
And so then Found It goes into this sort of PO invoice versus non-PO invoice.
Yes.
What's the difference there?
So a PO invoice is linked to a purchase order.
Okay.
That's the standard procedure, right? But sometimes purchases happen outside of that system, and that's where you get into non-PO invoices.
Right.
And those can be a little bit trickier just because there's less documentation, there's less oversight.
So if somebody in the company needs something really urgently and they just go and buy it without going through the normal process, that's where
it can create headaches for AP.
Headaches for the AP team.
Yeah, because it increases the risk of errors. And it also can weaken the company's negotiating power, right? Because if they're not consolidating their purchases with preferred vendors.
Interesting. I never thought about that.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's like all these little actions can have these big ripple effects.
Absolutely. And speaking of, found it brought up another important term, the P2P cycle.
Oh, I've heard that. Remind me what that is.
So P2P stands for procure to pay.
Okay.
And it's basically encompassing the whole life cycle of a purchase, from requisitioning the goods or services all the way to making the final payment.
Okay.
So it's really giving you that holistic view of how AP fits into the bigger picture of the company's operations.
Okay. So we've talked about the basics. We've talked about the process.
Uh-huh.
But Found It also has a whole section on AP job interview tips.
Yeah.
What'd they say?
One thing they really emphasized was showcasing your problem-solving skills. Like, companies really want to see that you can think critically, that you can add value beyond just processing invoices.
Yeah. So they want someone who can help them save money.
Exactly.
And be more efficient.
Yep. And another thing they highlighted was understanding the technical aspects, like SOX compliance.
Ooh, I've heard that. Remind me.
Yeah. So SOX stands for the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Yeah.
And it's all about protecting investors from fraudulent accounting practices.
Okay.
So in the world of AP, that means having really strong internal controls to prevent things like duplicate payments or unauthorized purchases.
So like making sure that multiple people have to sign off on stuff.
Exactly. Segregation of duties.
Okay.
So no one person has too much power. It's about checks and balances.
Checks and balances. Okay. So that makes sense. Now, I think we should dive into some of the trickier situations.
The pitfalls.
The pitfalls. That can really trip you up in AP when we come back for part 2.
Sounds good. All right, so welcome back. Hopefully you've got your thinking caps on, because we're about to get into some of the potential pitfalls.
Scary stuff.
The scary stuff. That can happen in AP.
Yeah, I mean, Found It really made it clear that even with the best intentions, things can go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So what are some of the things that, we should be on the lookout for?
Well, one of the most common ones is duplicate payments. And you might think, oh, that sounds really simple. But you'd be surprised how often it happens, especially in larger companies that are dealing with tons of invoices.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Paying the same invoice twice, that's got to be costly.
It can be a real drain on resources.
So how does that even happen?
Sometimes it's just human error.
Right.
You know, someone accidentally enters the invoice twice, or there's a miscommunication between departments. But, sometimes it can be a sign of something a little more serious, like intentional fraud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, fraud in AP.
Fraud in AP. That sounds a little ominous.
It's a real risk, unfortunately.
How does that work?
Well, there's a variety of schemes, people creating fake vendors or even altering legitimate invoices to pocket the difference.
So someone in the AP department could create a fake vendor, send a fake invoice, and then approve the payment to themselves.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have those strong internal controls and that segregation of duties that we talked about.
So multiple people have to sign off, like those heist movies?
Exactly. Checks and balances.
Okay.
It's like a vault. You need multiple keys to get in there. And speaking of things that can cost a company money, late payments.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's another big one.
We were talking about the benefits of paying early.
Right.
But what about the opposite?
Well, if you're consistently making late payments, it can really have a domino effect. First, you have late fees. That's eating into your profits. Then your company's credit rating can take a hit, and that makes it harder and more expensive to borrow money in the future. And, probably most important, it damages your relationships with your vendors.
Yeah, I bet they get frustrated having to chase down payments all the time.
Yeah, no one wants to work with a company that's known for being slow to pay their bills.
Right. So it's not just about good bookkeeping.
It's about your reputation.
It's about maintaining relationships.
Exactly. And we talked about earlier those non-PO invoices and how they can create extra work.
Right.
But Found It also highlighted them as a potential risk. Because remember, those are the purchases that happen outside of the standard purchase order process.
Right. Less documentation.
Exactly. So there's higher risk of errors. There's higher risk of delays.
So less oversight?
Less oversight. And it can be a slippery slope, because if employees start to get too comfortable bypassing that PO process, it can lead to something called maverick spending. And that's where people are just making purchases without any authorization or oversight.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare.
It can be. It really undermines a company's ability to track their spending, to negotiate those favorable terms with vendors, and just to maintain control over their budget.
So even though it might seem like a small thing, the way a company handles those non-PO invoices,
it can have big implications.
It's going to have big implications. Now, Found It didn't really go deep on technology, but they did mention that automation is becoming more and more common in AP.
Yeah, it's a huge trend.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, what's the impact?
I think, automation is changing everything these days. It's changing how we order food. It's changing how we drive our cars.
Right.
So AP is no exception. It's really undergoing this digital transformation, and I think it's creating both challenges and opportunities.
Okay.
So the tasks that used to be done manually, all that data entry, processing invoices, that's all being automated by software.
So instead of spending hours like staring at spreadsheets,
Yeah.
AP professionals can focus on more strategic stuff.
Exactly. They can analyze data, they can identify cost-saving opportunities, they can work more closely with other departments to streamline that whole P2P cycle we talked about.
So it's a win-win. But I do have to ask, with all this automation, is there a concern that, like, technology is going to replace jobs?
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern, and it's something that comes up a lot when we talk about the future of work.
Yeah.
But I think it's not so much about being replaced by robots.
Right.
It's about adapting and evolving.
Right.
The AP professionals that are going to thrive are the ones who embrace technology, learn new skills, and really focus on adding value beyond just processing those invoices.
So those problem-solving skills that found it, highlighted.
Exactly. That's what's going to set candidates apart.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, before we move on, I do have one more question. What happens when things do go wrong?
Yeah.
Like, how do you actually handle those errors and those discrepancies?
That's a great question, and that's something that we'll dive into when we come back for part 3. We're going to explore all the different approaches to resolving those issues, from the simple fixes to the more complex investigations.
All right, sounds good. We'll be right back. Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive into AP. We've talked about the good, the bad, and the techie, but let's be real, things don't always go perfectly, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's true in any business process,
Yeah.
but especially in AP, where accuracy is so important.
So let's talk about those oops moments.
Yeah.
What happens when an error or a discrepancy pops up? Who's responsible for fixing it?
Well, it really depends on, the nature of the issue. Sometimes it's a simple fix, like, a typo on an invoice, or maybe a purchase order number is missing. In those cases, the AP processor can probably just resolve it with a quick call or email to the vendor.
So good communication skills, a
Yeah.
little bit of detective work.
Exactly, but sometimes the issues are more complex. What if there's, a suspicion of fraud?
Ooh, yeah, that's a whole other level.
Yeah, that definitely raises the stakes. And any suspicion of fraud needs to be reported immediately to the appropriate people, like a supervisor, or maybe the company's internal audit department.
And that probably triggers a whole investigation.
Exactly. They would need to gather evidence, interview people, really figure out what's going on. And depending on how serious it is, it could even involve law enforcement.
Okay, yeah. So it's not just about numbers, it's also about protecting the company. But hopefully most issues aren't that serious.
Right. Most errors are unintentional, and they can be resolved through, the company's established procedures. One common tool is something called a credit memo.
Okay, I've heard that term. Remind me what a credit memo is.
So let's say a vendor accidentally overcharged the company, or maybe they sent a duplicate invoice. They would issue a credit memo to basically correct that error. So it acts as a credit against the original invoice and reduces the amount owed.
So it's like an accounting do-over.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. It helps to keep the books balanced and make sure everyone's on the same page. And speaking of being on the same page, good communication is really key when it comes to resolving any AP issues.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with vendors, you're dealing with internal departments, sometimes even external auditors.
Exactly. Clear and timely communication can prevent a lot of misunderstandings, it can speed up the resolution process, and it helps to maintain those good relationships with your vendors.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Roles, processes, challenges, even the future of AP with all this technology. As we wrap up, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest thing is that accounts payable is so much more than just paying bills. It really is a critical function that impacts every aspect of a company's financial health.
It's like the central nervous system, making sure everything flows smoothly.
Yeah, I like that. And as technology keeps evolving, AP professionals really have a chance to become true strategic partners, using their skills to drive efficiency, control costs, and really contribute to the company's success.
That's awesome. So for anyone listening who's thinking about a career in finance, don't underestimate the power of AP.
Definitely not.
It's a dynamic field, lots of opportunities to make a real difference.
Absolutely. Embrace the technology, keep learning, and never be afraid to ask questions. That's how you thrive in AP.
Great advice. Well, that's a wrap for our deep dive into the world of accounts payable. Hope you learned something new and maybe even got inspired to dive in yourself.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And keep exploring. We'll see you next time.